involved in social media, actually. He leads MEC social media offering, looking into paid own and earn, as well as what MEC mobile offer has for your clients. And then lastly, we have Pete Blackshaw. Pete is the global head for digital marketing and social media at Nestlé. And he has a very interesting background. He has some public policy, digital marketing, brand management experience. He's also a writer. He just published a book that is entitled Satisfy Customer Stealth Preference, Angry Customer Stealth 3000, running a business in today's consumer-driven world. And he's an active writer as well on Ad Age, an advertising age. He's a graduate from Harvard Business School. So that's my panel, so thank you for coming here. And I'm going to start with a general question, and there are cards that you can pass on if you have questions for them as well. So why don't you tell me, mobile, we talk about how much it's growing. I think I'm understanding, it's more comfortable. Mobile has brought all this growth and changes. How is mobile changing your business? Pete, let's start.
Well, clearly, if you start from consumer fundamentals, mobile is dramatically changing the consumer purchase cycle. The way we learn about products, I think, is greatly enabled by mobile devices, applications, services, and we're paying a lot of attention to that, how that might potentially change the way we bond and engage with consumers. I think there's clearly potential as an advertising vehicle. We're very much in the early stages of understanding where paid advertising may work. For brand builders, I think mobile is introducing a whole new dimension of how do you begin to layer service on top of the physical product. And I think that if you can get that proposition right, it can create real advantages. That said, I would say that it's a tough proposition. I mean, it's a very competitive space. I think you have to have a real compelling consumer value proposition, and that can require quite a bit of process on the front end to get there. I think a lot of the old rules still apply. Very, very deep consumer understanding, unmet needs. Those are the things that lead to potential breakthrough in the mobile area. But Nestlé has probably about 150 odd service apps across our many, many brands, and we're still in a pretty aggressive learning process.
The agency that you belong to, how do you think about more? What's the unique differentiation?
It's come of age. We now utilise it in a way we've never had before. We're hypercharging the way we plan now. We have to understand consumer behaviour more than we ever have. It's not just about doing a mobile campaign to get a click on there, but understanding that moment in time that customer, the user is using a mobile, and understanding what those increments might mean to us and how we can communicate to them.
Exactly.
I think it's also just how mobile as an industry has evolved over the years. I think sort of a few years ago, the only place you could buy mobile advertising was on the portals, and that's evolved in terms of a handful of different publishers. And now there's so many different areas that you can actually buy from a mobile advertising point across the platforms that are out there and the different sites. So you've got a huge variation. So it's really understanding more about the audience rather than just the placement.
So Mandreep, what about you from the publisher perspective? How do you think about it?
We're absolutely fascinated with the trends that we see within the mobile space. We certainly see it as one of the most dynamic areas, in terms of consumer behaviour, looking at mobility quite broadly when you think about smartphones, but also bringing tablets into the mix now as well. When we think about our business, obviously, when it comes to mobile, we touch it in so many different areas. We have launched a great OS within Windows Phone. We publish and build services such as Skype and MSN that sit across device platforms. And really, I think for us, it's been so valuable just to look across, all those different pieces of work and products that we've built, and just see, the changes in behaviour that we've just heard in the presentation earlier on. And it continues to be the area where we're investing a great deal to kind of learn and research and really sort of get deep into trends, because, quite frankly, no one's really cracked it yet. From the research that we see, things are changing on a monthly, 2-monthly, 3-monthly basis, so you're almost stepping up our research in this space a lot to kind of really stay in tune with the rapidly changing landscape.
Of course, we benefits with it, but also some challenges. So what would you say for you so far, one of the difficulties, one of the difficulties that Bob provides to you?
Yeah, I think you could answer that in a couple of different ways, really. I think first is, it's an ecosystem where there's an incredible amount of innovation. I think whether you're a company that's in the business of building an OS, or you're thinking about it from a publisher standpoint, building services, or an advertiser standpoint, there is still arguably some complexity in the industry when you think about, the average agency or advertiser can have at any one time 200 to 300 companies now. Look at this event. Look how big it is. And I think that there's to some extent still some complexity, certainly from an advertiser standpoint, in navigating the space and picking the bets that are going to deliver the right return on investment. And I think the agencies in particular, but also the emergence of in-house teams within brand organisations, are really leading the charge with sort of taking all that innovation, harnessing that, and experimenting, taking risks sometimes, and building your own learnings. So I think it's something that the industry is overcoming, but I still think with the plethora of companies, services, apps, offerings, it's staying abreast of all the innovation and using that. I think it's still something that's a challenge.
Yeah, from the app platform perspective, what would you say is the most difficult challenge you face?
I think it's the whole uniform aspect of mobile. I think there's still so many different players, as Mandreep was touched on, through rich media vendors, through to third-party ad-serving entities that we're still facing, through to the different creative formats that are now in the market. I remember when the mobile advertising first came out, we managed to run a standard GIF banner, which was incredible. And we launched Rich Media, which was a banner we clicked and went over the page, and that was fantastic. But now you've got all these different formats which are continuously coming out from developers and creative agencies, which are amazing. Unfortunately, because there are hundreds of different platforms and suppliers you can buy on, you've also got the added issue of all the different creatives. So it's a very tricky marketplace for a standard agency to handle. So I also think that the way that the media landscape has developed over the last 6 years, it's really transformed from being a content sort of performance play through to sort of mobile agencies driving the industry, through to media agencies now, not just appointing heads of mobile within each agency, but actually developing a flat structure of plan of buyers, understanding the benefits of value of mobile, which is then allowing them to grow and record.
Our agency has moved from having mobile only specialists and moved much more into the planning and buying teams, because at an individual level, media is media, we should be thinking about what's happening, whether it's mobile, whether it's desktop, we should be thinking about usage occasion, that customer or that user is going into it. And so we need to get that into our everyday planning. The difference being is we need to understand where the consumer is within that ecosystem of usage, because an advertisement might not necessarily be the right thing. It might be an application of the right thing, or it might be we want to send them to a story, an advertorial, something much more native. And that's where it gets quite exciting, is we're actually changing the way we need to plan. Much deeper engagement planning is coming out.
So when we were talking before, I know Nestlé has been very active thinking about how to use apps as a way to reach the consumer. Can you share with us, how you're thinking about the opportunity that these mediums bring into you, and how that's changing your relationship with your consumers?
Yeah, first I did want to volunteer challenge. I think our biggest challenge is thinking beyond the brand. I think we tend to enter the mobile space exclusively through the lens of the brand benefit. I think the consumer expects a lot more. I think you have to almost have a higher order value proposition, almost at a category life stage level. And I think one reason why a lot of consumer branded apps fail is because we're just too narrow. And I think what we've tried to do with apps such as Pet Centric from Purina,
or Nestlé dessert from France. It's to really think about like what's that fundamental compelling need. Is it helping a family over the holiday time make desserts, but not just advertise the brand? And it's really, really hard. And most of the incentives for brands are geared towards just kind of pushing that singular message. But we know if we look at the numbers, it's very difficult. Now, there are some things that we're focusing on that really kind of cut across all of our brands. So, for example, we've been asking ourselves, to what extent can mobile be used to drive greater transparency about what is behind the brand? So, for example, my colleague has brought some Kit Kats from our UK market where we've launched, I think, one of the more ambitious programs called Beyond the Label, where we're committed to basically, through a QR code reader, it's not just get the product ingredients, it's everything about our commitment to social responsibility, sustainability, much easier contact us forms. A lot of us have forgotten how to make feedback really easy to give, and in a mobile environment, you simply can't have 20 fields to allow the consumer to express their opinion. So really thinking about how you can take the QR code principle and allow the consumer to go much, much deeper into what the brand stands for. And to some extent, even without the brands doing this is already happening anyways. Consumers are going to Wikipedia, they're going to forums. There's a whole transparency principle emerging in the web. And what I think brands can do is actually enable that process and try to create a real win-win. So that's one example that kind of cuts across where we want to go with all of our brands. And on the single brand level, it's figuring out that really compelling service need. And I think we and most brands have a long way to go.
All of you, I don't know, who has their cell phone with them and how often do you have it in your pocket, right? So the mobile becomes such a close device, it has a special place for each of us. So how that unique relationship you form with your cell phone is influencing the consumer? Yeah.
Again, coming back to the research piece is something we're doing a great deal of, and coming back to the sort of end of 2012, we commissioned a piece of research called Meet the Screens. And this was effectively a piece of research that tried to map kind of devices to the kind of archetype that created emotions within consumers. And quite uniquely, I think, what came out with mobile was that it was the archetype for lover, because effectively it's that close relationship. The last thing you're doing at night is sometimes the first thing you're doing in the morning, and it's that very, very personal, passionate relationship. And I think there's something so deep within that, because I think really we're only scratching the surface with what we've seen today on mobile. I think there's the ability, with the right, relevant and respectful mechanisms, to create an incredibly personal relationship there. And I think that it's with you all the time. There's all the good things that we know about mobile. I really think looking at that in the context of other devices like the tablet, which in that same study came out as the wizard, because it made people feel like you could do things that other screens can't. It's a bit more immersive. I really think it's looking at mobility very broadly and thinking, what's the role that these different devices play. I agree with Justin, it's not just about picking one device or one channel, but it's about how do those screens talk to each other, what's the context between those devices. And for us, mobile, incredibly personal, like the love.
I also think that, sort of going back to that, they are very personal, it's the last thing to think of night or such like. It's also the amount of data now we can get through insight we can get through the apps and the types of sites that consumers are actually engaging with. So actually being able to utilise that data to then target consumers over the course of the day, not just by tactical targeting, but via kind of types of behavioural targeting, is very important, I think, for us in the industry, and it definitely allows us to tap into the personal nature of the mobile.
That's tricky.
There is.
I think there's still a lot of questions and debates we need to have before we take that to its full potential.
These days of the consumer when they're using the mobile, quite often they're using it to just kill time. Those moments when we're commuting, you look on a train and everyone's on their mobile phone. That's creating these sort of new media times where you have engagement that was never there before, and that's connected to the outside world as much as connected to that personal experience. Yeah, we're using it to save time, and to actually develop utilities for our consumers in a way that we can never think before. The wizard comes out in the phone, more ways than we know. And increasingly with tablets, and the new tablets we're seeing at the show as well, we're using it as a prime time device. We're using it to watch long form content. We're engaging with that content in places that we've never had before. And that's changing the whole notion of that prime time evening you spend in front of the TV. That can be at midday now or at 1 in the morning. It's about that richness of content. So we have to look at that need state of the consumer to really understand the effect it's having.
I think that's a really, really good point. I mean, I think that when I was at Nielsen, we used to think a lot about how certain media was cannibalizing other media. And, mobile and the iPads in particular, I think, are just the pad devices are just really opening up a lot of additional media consumption opportunities, highly contextualized. And I think the challenge for brands is to think about where they potentially can serve a real unmet need in those new emerging circumstances, whether it's the consumer that's home or sitting in the kitchen and the like. And I think that creates a whole new opportunity space. But again, it kind of comes back to the old-fashioned basics. I mean, really good consumer fundamentals. We have a method at Nestlé called brand building the Nestlé way. It has 7 different rooms, and one of them is just know your consumer deeply. And I think that principle applies so much to the mobile world. I mean, what gets the consumer excited, what adds value, and making sure that your mobile initiatives are following that diligently.
I think as you mentioned, just on the train, everyone is looking at their smartphones. You see all these photos of people walking down the street bumping into each other. But I do believe that it is almost like the remote controls of our life. We are using mobile now to listen to music on the way. And you mentioned iPads, and that's what people are consuming. They're not, don't have big newspapers the first thing in the morning. It's all looking at the Sunday Times. So I think it's allowing interactivity over the course of the day, over these periods, to actually allow us to engage with different people doing different things.
Justin, one question, right? So we talked about how mobile has changed the way we're engaging with this platform. Would you say that today brand advertisers are already looking at mobile as, just not a direct response medium, but a branding medium? And how do you think they can actually really tap into that potential?
I think there's been a shift change over the last sort of 6 months, and it's only about 6 months we've had that shift change. We've had benefits from a lot of the rich media opportunities that you can do on mobile now that make it easy, take the complexity out for clients to do really good activity on mobiles. And the whole notion of the reason it is building up is because mobile's humanizing that experience. It's much nicer to touch and feel and to swipe and pinch than it is to click on a mouse. And it feels intuitive for us as customers to do that on the phone. And as a brand, that's exciting because you're finding new ways to engage with your customers and to get them touching with them. Do I think we're doing it in the right way? I would say no, because we are still bucketing mobile, tablet, desktop. We need to get away from that and come back to this notion of how it's being used and when it's being used, and make it much more resumptive that I can pick up the experience when I go to different devices at different times. That's when it starts to get exciting, and that's when brand advertising becomes brand storytelling in a much deeper, meaningful way for our customers.
We think about not just engagement with the medium and engagement with the advertising, but also the impact that engagement can have on an outcome, a reaction, right? So the purchase. So Pete, I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about that whole funnel, right? From reaching your consumer, trying to engage with them, telling them the right thing that resonates with them, but actually how you're trying to drive the purchase.
Well, it depends on the brand, it depends on the overall objective. And we have some brands that do e-commerce particularly well, such as Nespresso, where a significant percentage of capsules are purchased online, and therefore you're going to see a whole value chain of experience from awareness, trial, purchase, advocacy that you're accomplishing through the mobile app. Others are going to be focused exclusively on trial, so it really depends on that core value proposition. It's the same way you think about almost like KPIs have been kind of thrown a curveball because of mobile. Remember when in Internet 1.0 we were all obsessed with time spent, and that was almost like the less time the better, right? Especially if you're trying to solve a problem or serve a utility purpose for the consumer. So it really depends on what your end objective is. What I try to think about is just, you know, how do I help consumers get answers and services as fast as possible, and I trust that that will ultimately you know, reflect well on purchase behavior. And so far the learning has been very encouraging on that front.
Mandreep, from the publisher perspective, again, a very uniquely viewed, much more engaging. So how do you think about the opportunities that MOA has brought to your business in terms of that special value that content and engagement brings to your pleasure bags?
I think broadly, one of the trends we're seeing is this theme of companion applications. So one app on one device talking to basically applications or content on another device. I can give you an example of an app that we launched called Smart Glass, which is basically an app that can sit on your tablet or your phone, and it can basically talk to your Xbox and control content. Where you can be basically watching video or listening to music, and the tablet or phone can turn into a device that gives you supplementary content. Like it could give you more information about the artist, could give you more kind of recommendations that can actually turn into the remote control for your TV. So we're fascinated, you know, thinking about developing products. How are they going to talk between screens? You know, we also look at other innovations that we're seeing in the industry, look at kind of cloud connectivity. So, you know, we look at the launch of Windows 8, it's fully powered by SkyDrive, our cloud application, so it's becoming easier for consumers to share content. Those are turning into macro trends. I mean, there's an expectation from consumers, you know, that it's probably more today about user experience than it is about content being king. It's almost user experience has become king, because in this world where people do now have multiple devices, they expect everything to be working seamlessly. So when you're in the business of creating the platforms, building ecosystems like we are with Windows 8 and with Windows Phone, you know, it really is thinking quite broadly into the usage patterns. Also thinking about it from an advertiser's point of view, because, you know, what really tablets, slates, phones, they're all turning into a canvas for creativity. You know, and I think, again, just to touch on the point that, you know, I think we're really only scratching the surface. Rich media is scaling well, but I think that we've seen some great examples from many players in the industry really trying to innovate and take this to the next level. Looking at layering, you know, creativity of ad formats, you know, with targeting and big data. That's when it all becomes so fascinating, because, you know, really, if you think about people that are publishing content on services, ultimately, you know, it's either becomes transactional, where, you know, they're in the business of charging for that content, or it becomes about advertising, you know, and thinking about monetization through advertising. And, you know, it's really important to get the right balance. You know, for us as a business, we're incredibly passionate about building, you know, products that consumers love, and I think, you know, Windows 8 has given us a great chance to push some great devices out there with partners, but it's keeping that balance of relevance and respect, especially when you think about it from an advertising point of view.
Yes.
Actually, one of the things that frustrates me, and is mentioned actually right up front, is that we're still building mobile activity in silos, with consumers now demanding an experience that's relevant to the device they're going on. So we have to sort of get away. I'm going to build a tablet app, I'm going to build a companion app, I'm going to build something that's relevant for that device, presumptive, HTML5, whatever it might be. Yeah, we have to make sure that that customer experience is paramount, relevant.
I mean, I think there's two things we need. We clearly need to mobilize everything. I mean, small is the new big. We've just got to shrink, serve, and simplify everything we do. Even TV copy needs to be fit for small screens, recognizing that people will look at repurposed ad content on YouTube and the like. But we also need to stimulate efforts by burrowing deep into that service proposition that you can't just integrate. You've literally got to marshal energy and resources. And on one hand, I'm saying everything has to be mobilized, but I also have a dedicated mobile person on my team who's just pushing and plowing forward. And there is some really unique tech sophistication that is behind all of this. We were talking about data integration. I mean, it's so complicated to make your head spin at times, but it really requires dedicated capacity. So you got to play on all fronts. Doesn't mean you're going to have that breakthrough app that's going to go crazy viral. It
So again, I think there's two different pathways, and you have to parallel process both of them.
You're talking about how it's changing the consumer, right? So how we interact with the device. And the growth is significant from the consumer perspective. Could you say that you see now that growth, the consumer growth, being transferred now to the advertiser, right? Are advertisers already comfortable with mobile as a platform? And are you seeing that progress as well there?
Yes, is the answer. Yeah, we're seeing much more advertisers demanding, much more clients demanding us to advertise on mobile, but for the wrong reasons sometimes, and trying to make sure they do it for the right reason. One reason is just because it's written in the trade press that mobile's a big hot thing, and my clients are like that, obviously. But yeah, it's the hot thing at the moment. You know, you have to have a mobile campaign, you have to have a mobile site, you know, apps take a resurgence as well. We have to have an app, and that's not the right way of thinking about it. It's more, it comes back to what we're saying about the consumer, how they want to use it. You know, is it utility, is it service, is it advertising? That's what we need to think about, and then we can bring them into it. But the great thing is, those conversations are happening, and clients are understanding that mobile is fundamentally shifting the way we think about marketing communications, and that's the big thing. It is fundamentally shifting in the future.
How would you say it shifts the ability to reach the consumer? So we talked about what we tell them, how we tell it to them. What about the reach component?
For me, I've got a simple one. You're never more than 1 second away from your phone, so you're always with the consumer.
I think if you look at the size of the industry, you could look at 2 or 3 different global studies that say, you know, the industry last year was worth about $9 billion, which is sitting at around about 1% of global media spend. You know, what that doesn't include, that looks at things like display, search, and messaging. But what it doesn't look at is that, you know, there's been a vast amount of money invested by brands effectively building either destinations or assets. You know, it doesn't include that spend, which is actually where, you know, a lot of brand strategies on mobile started off. It was to say, great, I'm going to go and build an app, you know, for X device, or I'm going to go and build a mobile site. I'm going to do both. Because you need to send someone somewhere from advertising or build a self-sufficient experience. And I think that when we think about reach, what we know from talking to various peers in the industry is there's actually a great deal of reach out there. The question is it the right sort of reach, and where are you sending people to? So I really think that the last sort of couple of years, I would say in particular, have been about brands thinking more holistically about destinations and experiences and spending a hell of a lot of money in that space, you know, getting into real big 7-figure sums in some cases, building those destinations, and then it's about promoting. So I think the reach is there, but, you know, for us, you know, we've been working with brands for over 5 years now on mobile advertising, providing access to our consumers, and I still think it's the large part of activity is being driven by like 20% of brands. There's still a big 80% of businesses that are worried about taking risks, worried about investing. And, you know, it's my belief those barriers have come down. It would be nice to see, you know, more companies embracing mobile and you know, sort of taking advantage of the reach that does exist there.
I think the other critical point here is to what extent does mobile fortify and enrich existing reach vehicles? So I think, you know, we can determine that mobile is a primary advertising vehicle, or we can say that it's an amplifier. I think it plays a huge amplification role, generating earned media, even off of other contact point triggers like TV, print, and the like. You could say that mobile is the connective tissue of all contact points to an additional close the sale opportunity. And that's something I've been spending a lot of time thinking about. I mean, you saw it with the Academy Awards, you saw it with the Super Bowl, World Cup, Olympics, where you've got just a massive amplifier effect between a primary media investment that already gets a high amount of reach, but you've got this, you know, because mobile is so conversation-based, because it's so easy to share the things that we like, or share the things that we don't like, I call that spurned media, you get either really, really big dividends from the things you're already doing well, or you get massive amounts of punishment. And I think that's almost like the first fundamental we need to figure out, which is like, how do we just get a higher return off of what we're already doing? And it goes back to what I said before. If you don't have a
really breakthrough idea or service proposition from the get-go, mobile's never going to reward you. But if you do, you'll actually find yourself getting a much better ROI.
So we have a microphone in the room if you guys have some questions. Okay.
Can I ask questions to someone who tweaked it? They didn't have questions.
What they're looking for and why, the motivations. I think conversational analysis is really important. I think it's a price of entry. And I think it even applies to things like basic customer service. I'm amazed at how many brand builders don't know what people can say to them on the phone. And we know that social media starts with the phone. You know, usually the people that are angry or happy that talk to you on the phone, that typically amplifies in social venues. So understanding that really well, and I think clickstream patterns, I think those are all really good starting points. And again, you know, even tools like Google Analytics can take you right to what percentage of the consumers are using mobile devices. We've seen incredible increases in the last 12 months that kind of slap you in the face and say, hey, you got to rethink your value proposition because everyone's getting to you through a much smaller device, and you've got a lot of clutter and complexity.
The amount of parts we work with now that have data and these guys and everything, it's just all out there. And it's about sort of bringing the data in, understanding the audiences and the signals that are happening in real time more than anything. And that's what you're working with networks and can really offer some of us sometimes. It's just this notion of if this consumer is interacting now, what does that mean for my campaign tomorrow, the day after, the day after that? Bringing the social signals that are coming from sort of the events that you mentioned and other events that are going on that's coming through Facebook and through Twitter especially, and understanding those in the real time and bringing it back into our planning is changing. And I think we're seeing this sort of 24/7, 365 culture starting to come through. We're having to make a quick analysis of what the customer is doing versus long-term analysis and correcting as we go along.
Don't underestimate the deafening sound of silence. Because I think a lot of our initiatives in mobile are met with silence, and I think that's a telling sign that consumers are pretty much voting with their feet, kind of move on to the next opportunity.
I'd also go so far as to say there's two things that we've seen that have been successful. One is, in particular with regards to mobile, you know, looking at kind of the quantitative side of any activity. So it is about looking, you know, at your raw campaign results, what the sort of objective of the ROI was, you know, kind of link that to physical data that you have as a business, you know, to measure that. But also, you've seen great advances in this space. I mean, you know, site analytics tools, app analytics tools, they add a real layer of definition to campaigns that wasn't around 2 or 3 years ago because these tools are being used in such a way. And I think on the kind of qualitative side, some of the best work we've produced has always had a research component sitting right next to it, which is relevant and addressing basically, you know, consumer impact. And, you know, mobile research, the amount of sort of businesses in the space, I know Nielsen's doing some great work in this space as well, you know, that to me is a fundamental, especially at the building phase when you're trying to learn about the impact that campaigns are driving on your target consumers. You know, there's nothing more important than having a mix of those two things to measure.
I think just to add in there also, I think that just been talking about in terms of interest and content and those other different data points. With mobile, the biggest differentiator for mobile is about location, actually understanding where people are consuming the various data points across their day, but not just where they're consuming or where they have been consuming, but how often they have been consuming within those locations, and then building that on top of all the other data points to give some recency and frequency across the board.
Date part, like Twitter, date parts are fascinating. And we've got some brands that for whatever reason, they get their tweets or their likes on Facebook at 8 p.m. You know, and you can start to glean these patterns that you have to stay really disciplined to the data. But it's interesting, and it always challenges your assumptions. I'm usually quite humble once you really dive into the real consumer data.
Pete, I have a question about the Kit Kat campaign and how you were mentioning about brand transparency. I was just curious, what was the social impact and how did you measure the success of that?
Great question. So we just launched it, literally just shipped out in the last month or so. So actually this is one of the first times we've actually publicly talked about it. So The good news is that because all the data that consumers would learn is sitting on a server, you can actually track what they're going after. I did have a chance to look at some early data a couple weeks ago. I was in the UK office, and it's pretty interesting what consumers are going for. Like one area that we certainly are hoping that consumers will learn much more about. They can talk about the cocoa plan, which is about our commitment to the cocoa farmers. And frankly, if people are not going to that content, that would disappoint me. And so that's one thing that we're looking at to find out. Okay, are we getting enough traffic? Is it easier? I mean, we'll probably learn pretty quickly. We've all made a lot of assumptions about QR code readers and how popular they are. We're going to learn a lot in the next month or so whether a lot of those assumptions are spot on. I think there's a lot to it, but we have a lot to learn. But we'll be measuring that over time to find out how well we're breaking through.
Yeah, what will your expectations be as a brand impact? So you can wait for the data.
Sure.
But what will your intention in terms of what will happen to the brand as a result of this campaign?
Well, at the end of the day, we believe that there's a powerful and compelling story behind the brand. I think there's what the brand stands for, the integrity of the processes, its history, its legacy, and I think those are all opportunities. I think mobile applied properly can really open that up in very powerful ways. And I do believe consumers expect this. And if the brands don't volunteer this, they'll find other ways. I mean, the level of research that consumers are doing today on brands is unprecedented. And that's why we have to, and for brands, it's creating a whole other level of accountability. To some extent, you've got this digital trail, or the complaints, the negative reviews, all that stuff rises to the surface really, really fast. But if you do have a history of winning with consumers and trust, I think those are things that can also reward you through tools like this. Great question.
There are some of us who unfortunately don't live in things in the world as you guys are. So there are some of us here who are actually from the Caribbean, and it seems as if research is very important, but it's quantitative or qualitative. For those of us who may not have access to as much as you have, what would you consider to be the key KPIs for marketing in a mobile world? I know that you may think from 20, but even if you were to consider the top 5.
I think from my point of view, we typically have quite a global outlook with a lot of our partners, and I think that I understand the challenge of what you're describing, which is that, as we saw from the slides earlier on, the world is at a different place with regards to mobile and mobility, and that creates challenges. But what I would point to, rather than 5, is just one, which is there's a great wealth of knowledge that exists in the world today about, trends, consumer usage on mobile, how advertising's been performing, which type of mechanisms are working. And I think, from a readiness point of view, if you're an emerging market, which is a big ambition for us this year in terms of rolling out more of what we're doing in mobile, we're really having to look at those trends as a baseline, because generally you can kind of pull together some quite generalized assumptions, which you can then layer with other sources of information that exist at more of a local level around other advertising mechanisms. And that's from my point of view, to any brand or any company thinking about the mobile space, it starts off looking at these macro level trends and then trying to basically layer and segment information from that local market or region to try and make some relevance. And surely it will only be a matter of time before mobile becomes much bigger. So it's about building a story over time. As we said earlier with mobile, it's not sort of a destination. It really is a journey. We often hear this thing about the year of mobile, but really, even in developed markets, the trends are changing every 2 or 3 months. So I think taking advantage of what's out there already is a great start.
Hi there, question for you, Justin. You mentioned earlier that a lot of that has happened with regards to taking out the complexity of mobile in the last 6 months, but yet you said it wasn't used to its full potential. So my question is it about the platforms and the inventory that they're offering, or is it more about the brands not exploring into the right potential, basically? And if anything, would the platform stand out for you with regards to making it easy for mobile advertising and delivering impact?
Okay, so if I'm talking about inventory basis, I advertising here. I think each of the rich media platforms which is predominantly access into mobile advertising have different benefits. I'm not going to recommend one over another on stage. But what's not being realised is that we still have a hangover from a lot of the cheap app inventory that's out there, and the cheap inventory that's being used for performance, which is used in the right way for that type of advertising. But when our clients see that a small banner at the top that can expand down and have a much more engaging experience that uses the functionality and the intuition a phone has, but it's going to cost them 10 times more, they get scared because they've almost been indoctrinated into that small banner ad to then click through to a website that quite often is substandard and not having that right intuitive engagement. So part of the education is if we want to utilise the mobile phone, and I'm talking pretty much phones here over tablets, by the way, if we want to use the phone as a much more immediate, much more personal device that is being used in location-based services or much more immediate services, then we want the engagement to happen there and then while the customer's on, or the consumer is on that mobile site of their choice versus sending them off to another destination. And so that's where I think we have to understand a bit more how consumers want to engage with us and bring quality of content much more to the front versus making them find it so it's there and then. And I think that way we use the services that allow us to scroll down and look into things and engage with it the way we want to engage with our mobile phone. Last question.
This question is directed to anyone who wants to take it, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts around the use of video on mobile devices as an engagement mechanism in advertising, and if you've seen any impactful usage, either from brand creation side or user creation side.
I've seen some really good use of mobile video, and actually within the UK market, we're seeing it as a much more primary function, especially when we're looking at more sort of mid-form content, sort of sub 10 minutes, for that under sort of 24 age group, that they're expecting to sort of engage with these type of formats, and they're actively going on sites that have much more video orientation in there. And again, it comes down to that notion of if I'm killing time and I've got a good 3G or 4G connection, then I want to have audio visual, and that's going to be a real driver as we move forward as the data gets much more prevalent.
Video over the last few years has definitely evolved. I remember when mobile started coming out on the WAP, and to watch a 30-second preview of Coronation Street or EastEnders, you have to then be subjected to a 30-second advert, and this was purely just to fund the content because the data was so expensive. And this has really evolved with video, with pre-roll, and with interstitials over the course of the last few years. What is interesting is because of the immersiveness of the mobile phone, the smartphones, I think that you've now got your captive audience, and I think across all this sort of your 25, 35-year-olds, you can now actually allow them to engage with the video through the interactive functionality that you've now got within the industry, so that they can pause whatever they're watching and go into tweet about it from your social side through to buying through an e-commerce site or whatever they're looking to do. So I think that's really allowing consumers to engage more within the video side.
I'm internally bullish on video, but I do think video has to fight a lot harder for engagement in a mobile environment. And we've actually picked up quite a few learning. We have about 650 Facebook pages, something like 120 million fans, and so on any given day we're publishing a lot of content. So we've actually learned a lot, and the growing share of that is through mobile devices. And we've learned a lot about what is really clicking. We found that strong visualization does really, really well on mobile, but it's typically in photo format, not in video format. And there are some cases where videos will go viral and everything like that, but in terms of like things that I can predict with reasonably high levels of confidence, visualization does really well in video. And there's a certain discipline that has to be applied to it, has to be the right visualization, simple headlines and the like, but that's one area where I think platforms like Facebook and Twitter probably taught us quite a bit about what is truly engaging or clicking and what's not.
No, certainly add on to that. If you look at the macro trends, the data clip that we were just talking about here would have cost you something ridiculous like 10 or 15 pounds of data charges in the days when packages went around. You know, the world has changed. You know, these devices now, using Wi-Fi has opened up a new gateway to be able to consume rich content, download it. What's the other thing, you know, we're seeing is that there's an expectation from consumers that, you know, you're paying a subscription of some variety for either music or video now, and it's working across everything. It's working in your living room, you know, we see that with Xbox, is where our initiatives with music and video started off. Now we've launched Xbox Music that works across tablet and phone, and, you know, we're seeing some dramatic usage uptake there. And, you know, it's what consumers are telling us. There are loads of successful multi-screen apps to provide music and video content. So I expect this space to continue. This space will continue exploding, and I think that with that growth becomes a more realistic opportunity for advertising, and also thinking about what advertising means in that context. You know, is it stitching a pre-roll or a post-roll onto that, or is it really trying to be more dynamic and creative and understanding, you know, what type of content are people consuming, more about interests? And so it's a good question, and I think it's probably amongst the most interesting spaces at the moment.
And that's for everybody here. So we are February, right? So 2013 just started, lots of change, lots of growth. 1 year from now, we look back. What do you predict will happen? What do you think is going to happen on the mobile industry? What's your prediction?
I think more ubiquity. I think for many of us it will be the starting point, not the add-on, not the silo. I suspect I think we'll start to see a pullback on brands doing apps, not because they can't win. I think brands are going to realize that there's going to be a few winners and probably a lot of losers, and I think we've been through a pretty high experimentation phase. So where we do see brand activity, you'll probably see some bigger bets against those opportunities versus a ton of little bets. Those are a couple of things that I predict.
I think from a brand point of view, the notion of TV Plus coming about. We talked a bit about companion screening. I think it's actually about multi-screening and actually understanding consumer behavior whilst I'm watching whatever primary screen it is. And then from a media planning point of view is bringing that hyper-targeting back in of actually how do we get day parting back in and tie it in with the big data opportunities to actually deliver synchronized experiences on multiple devices in different formats for people. And I think it's going to drive quicker than we know.
I think from my side it's going to be, from the advertising point of view, I think it's going to be a lot of consolidation. I think there's going to be less places to purchase media in the ecosystem, which I think is a good thing. I think that there will be more standardization across the board in terms of creativity, in terms of technology as well, in terms of tracking formats. And I think the mobile industry will be a lot more palatable for agencies to bite into, because it's going to be a lot easier to implement a campaign rather than where we are today, where it's a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I think the theme for me is just more scale. You know, I think is one thing that's going to continue to happen in this industry, making it more of an addressable opportunity. I think you're going to see more advertisers. That 80% I was talking about earlier, getting involved, taking risks, you know, learning through their own mistakes and learning through their own wins. I think you're going to see more publishers. There are a lot of publishers that still don't have mobile destinations, and we're going to continue to see big media companies, you know, investing, building great products that do talk multi-screen, that work well with each other multi-screen. And I think, most importantly, I just think we're going to continue to see some exciting trends. You know, innovation in this industry is going to continue. It's been happening for about 10 years now, and I don't think it's going to happen forever. I think there's a shelf life of innovation in the mobile space that sits at around about another 3 to 5 years. So, you know, I think really there's a window for brands, for advertisers to come in and really sort of seize this opportunity and really sort of be seen as innovators, and I think it's incredibly exciting. Another big year, I believe, for mobile.
We have time for one last question, I think, before we need to depart.
Hi. In terms of creative creating content for consumers on different mobile devices, how young is too young as a target audience? Because you want to try and, engage a lot of your consumers young and then, stay with that journey as they grow older. But how young is too young, do you think?
I think again, for us, the reason I mentioned it is because Claudia and I had a chat. I mean, how young is about this young, where if I'm in my lock screen now on Windows Phone and I move, there's something called Kids Corner. You look, think about the way kids are killing time at family parties and weddings now. It's basically, right, it's getting the device in the hand, it's occupying them. If you look at kids sometimes now, they're actually trying to touch screens. Because in their world, even the TV, everything should swipe left or right, you can pinch it. I think that's an amazing space. I think it's a space we need to be incredibly careful, and make sure that there's a level of comfort. But, do we see younger and younger audiences engaging with screens? Absolutely. And it's about thinking what's the right experience and making that a safe environment, getting relevant and respectful. And when you think about marketing to them, I think there it's literally comes down to like an interpretation of what advertising is. That will, as we think about digital, you can expect the interaction with advertising to start from a much earlier age than probably any of us were sort of really seriously considering advertising or ad interaction. And I think it's a great space to watch. But where I'd love to really see this start is just content creation, more content creation for younger audiences, great cartoons, things that really made us come alive in our young days, watching a box. We have similar toys, but I just think today's toys for young audiences, all those playthings, or the phones, or the tablets, even soon the TVs, just making that accessible for young audiences. I'm very passionate about that.
I think you actually see a movement from the younger generation to create their own content. In London, I was trying to rack my brains going through, there's a couple of Australians that came over that do pranks in Australia, and they built up a big cult following, and in Hyde Park, all these kids descended on there because they wanted to engage with these kids. There's businesses such as Waywire, which is creating a news from a much younger perspective and a younger generation and creating movements around it. And I think that's the beauty of the sort of app startup economy and where we're going, is that anyone can get involved in it, anyone can play with it, anyone can be their own journalist and get their credibility and following. I think that's what's going to get them excited, but there needs to be training. There needs to be how to utilise sort of mobile news systems and mobile content systems at school to actually make it of value. Otherwise, we're just going to be tipping around the edges, I think. It's scary places.
Well, thank you very much to the panel.